If you had told me a year ago that I'd be lying awake in a stranger's house, clutching a blanket to my chin while every shadow in the room stretched and twisted with secrets, I'd have laughed. Or maybe I'd have just kept scrolling, letting another midnight story slide past, too far away to touch me. But tonight, this is my reality. And if you're reading this because you think you're alone in the darkness, trust me, I know what that feels like. Damn, my name is Emma Hastings. 32. Not married, no children, unless you count the dog. I used to believe I had everything figured out, a steady job, an apartment in the city, a plan for every week, a backup plan for every plan. Then everything changed, so quickly it felt like falling. I lost my job, my lease expired, my friends scattered like pigeons at the first sign of a storm. The only constant was Max, my shaggy, black and white mutt, who looked at me with eyes too deep for words. So here I am, starting over in a rented house that doesn't smell like home. The bed is too soft. The walls are too thin. Every time the pipes rattle, I flinch. The blanket I cling to is someone else's, washed and folded but carrying the memory of another life. I haven't really slept in weeks, and the only thing that keeps me grounded is the steady sound of Max breathing at the foot of the bed. If I'm being honest, I'm terrified. I tell myself I'm strong, independent, resourceful, but I've never felt so small. When the sun goes down and the house creaks around me, I wonder if I'm the only one lying awake, wondering how I got here. Tonight, though, something feels different. The air is thick, tense, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I keep telling myself that it's just a house, just a night, just me and my dog. But some part of me isn't so sure. I turn onto my side, watching the clock flicker to 2:07 a.m. The wind picks up outside, rattling a loose shutter somewhere down the hall. Max lifts his head from his bed and looks at me, his eyes glinting in the half-dark. For a moment, I almost ask him if he's scared too. Instead, I force a laugh and whisper, "It's just the wind, buddy." He gives a quiet woof, a sound more breath than bark, and rests his chin back on his paws. I envy his calm. I wish I could crawl into that warm, quiet place in his head where nothing matters but food, sleep, and the sound of my voice. Instead, my own mind is a tangled knot of what-ifs and might-have-beens. The house creaks again. I stiffen. In my old apartment, I knew every sound by heart, the neighbor's late-night TV, the elevator's whine, the humming of pipes when the heat kicked in. Here, every noise feels like a question I can't answer. I pull the blanket tighter around me, as if fabric could shield me from memories, from fear, from whatever might be lurking out there in the dark. I think about the life I left behind. The office with its fluorescent lights and bitter coffee. The way my colleagues smiled at me, polite but never close. The steady paycheck, the certainty. I never realized how much I depended on routine until it vanished. Now, even breathing feels like a conscious act, one I have to remind myself to do, over and over. In the suffocating quiet of this room, Max's breathing is the only sound I can trust. I focus on it, counting each inhale, each exhale, like sheep jumping over a fence. Somewhere between 30 and 40, my eyelids start to droop. I let my mind wander, drifting back to a time before all this, when I believed that home was a place, not a feeling. I remember laughter echoing in sunlit rooms, the warm press of a friend's hand in mine, the soft shuffle of Max's paws on hardwood floors. For a moment, I'm almost there, almost safe, but the wind howls again, louder this time, dragging me back. The room is darker than before. The clock blinks 2:36. My heart stutters, and I realize I've been holding my breath. Max shifts in his bed, ears pricking. He makes a sound, half whine, half question, that sets my nerves jangling. I sit up, eyes scanning the room for movement. "Did you hear something?" I whisper. My voice is embarrassingly small. Max stands and stretches, shaking out his fur. He pads over to the window, nose twitching as he sniffs the air. He glances at me, tail wagging, as if to say, "I've got this." I manage a shaky smile. "You're braver than I am, big guy." He paces once around the room, satisfied that nothing is amiss, and settles back into his bed. I watch him, my heart slowing, and finally lie back down. The blanket is warm against my skin, and I burrow deeper, trying to pretend that Max's courage can rub off on me, but sleep refuses to come. My mind won't let me forget how far I've fallen, how much I've lost. I wonder if it's possible to start over when you're this broken, if a person can really rebuild from nothing. I wonder if Max senses how close I am to giving up, if that's why he won't let me out of his sight. Outside, the wind dies down, leaving a heavy, charged silence in its wake. I close my eyes, willing myself to drift away. I imagine a world where nothing hurts, where every fear is just a shadow easily chased away by morning light. But the dark is stubborn tonight, clinging to the corners of the room and to the corners of my mind. Suddenly, I feel it, a shift in weight at the end of the bed. The blanket moves, so subtly I might have missed it if I wasn't so tightly wound. My breath catches. I don't open my eyes right away, half convinced it's just my imagination, a trick played by exhaustion and fear. But then there's another movement, closer this time, a gentle tug at the blanket as someone edges onto the bed. My eyes fly open. The room looks the same, but everything feels different. My pulse hammers in my throat. I should be scared, but all I feel is a strange kind of anticipation, as if I'm on the brink of something important, something that might change everything. I glance toward Max's bed, but he's not there. The space is empty, his blanket rumpled and abandoned. My gaze travels to the foot of my own bed, where the covers are bunched and shifting. I swallow hard, half dreading, half hoping. The blanket moves again, a small, hesitant ripple, and then I see him. Max's face emerges from the folds of the blanket, eyes wide and searching, ears perked as if he's waiting for my permission. For a heartbeat, we just stare at each other, caught in the fragile silence of the moment. Then he crawls forward, pressing his cold nose against my hand. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. All the fear, all the loneliness, all the questions swirling in my head, suddenly they don't matter. Max is here. He's not supposed to be on the bed, not according to the rules I set to keep some order in the chaos. But tonight, rules feel small and distant. Tonight, the only thing that matters is that I'm not alone. I slide over, making room for him. He curls up beside me, warm and solid, his heartbeat a quiet thump against my side. The tension in my chest eases, just a little. I rest my head on his back, closing my eyes as his fur tickles my cheek. For the first time in weeks, I let myself believe that maybe things will get better. Maybe this house will become a home, maybe the dark won't always feel so empty. Maybe with Max by my side, I can learn to be brave again. The blanket settles around us, cocooning us from the world outside. And as I drift at last towards sleep, I realize something I should have known all along. Sometimes, the face you need to see in the dark is the one that's been there all along, waiting, watching, loving you even when you can't love yourself. I didn't sleep, not really. It was more like drifting in and out, half caught in dreams, half awake in the strange darkness, my hand curled in Max's fur. The room was thick with that odd, shivering quiet that only comes at night when every small sound feels too loud, when shadows blur and bend against the walls. I tried to let myself relax, tried to pretend this was normal, that my dog sneaking into bed wasn't a sign of anything at all. But my mind wouldn't let me go. Max shifted beside me, his body pressed against my legs under the blanket. Every so often, his nose twitched, or his head jerked a little as if he'd heard something I couldn't. I ran my hand down his neck, through the long fur behind his ears, my own silent reassurance, a promise that I was here, too. Maybe for both of us, but sleep didn't come. I watched the ceiling, my eyes tracing faint patterns in the plaster. I tried to count my breaths, to focus on the rise and fall of Max's chest. I tried to tell myself that the world outside these four walls couldn't hurt me tonight. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The minutes crawled. I listened for the wind, for the pipes, for the sound of my own heartbeat. I thought about the rules I'd made, the dog bed in the corner, the closed bedroom door, the fresh start that was supposed to fix everything. But the house didn't care about my rules, and neither, it seemed, did Max. At 3:21 a.m., a floorboard creaked in the hallway. I froze. Max's ears pricked forward under the blanket, and he lifted his head to look at me, his eyes deep and questioning. "It's just the house," I whispered, but my voice felt small, even to me. Yet he licked my hand, a quick, nervous swipe of his tongue, and then tucked his nose back under my arm as if hiding could make us both invisible. I wanted to believe it was all in my head. But I couldn't shake the sense that the house was listening, that the walls had learned my name, that the air itself remembered other tenants, other lonely nights. I shivered, pulling the blanket closer. For a while, I tried to make sense of it. Why was Max so restless tonight? Why did the house feel so alive all of a sudden? I squeezed my eyes shut, thinking back to every apartment, every room I'd ever called home. None of them had ever made me feel so exposed. I remembered, all at once, the years before Max, before responsibility, before everything changed. Nights when loneliness wasn't a threat, just a fact. Now, though, I had something to lose. Max whimpered softly, almost inaudibly, and pressed closer. I shifted, letting him crawl up until his head rested on my shoulder, his breath hot and rapid against my cheek. I held him tight, both of us pretending that it was the storm outside that scared us, not the silent tremors inside ourselves. The hours passed, and with every minute, the room seemed to grow smaller, the air heavier, as if the darkness itself were folding in around us. My thoughts churned. What was I doing here? What if I couldn't make this place a home? What if I never found my way back to the person I used to be? I heard the fridge cycle on in the kitchen, the faint hum stretching down the hall. For a second, I almost laughed at myself. I was a grown woman, terrified by an empty house, clinging to a dog like a lifeline. But there was no one to see me, not tonight. Something brushed against the blanket near my feet. I jumped. Max sat up abruptly, his tail thumping once, loud and jarring in the stillness. He stared at the end of the bed, his body tense, eyes wide and searching. I followed his gaze, my heart hammering. There was nothing there. Just the blanket, twisted in the same place I'd left it when I tossed and turned, but Max wouldn't settle. He crawled up further, almost lying on top of me now, his nose pressed to my face as if to block my view of anything else. His eyes, dark and shining, bored into mine. I could see the question in them. Are you okay? I wanted to tell him yes. Instead, I swallowed and stroked his side, whispering, "We're fine, Max. We're okay." But my hands were shaking. For a long time, we just lay there. I listened to Max's breathing, the sound of his heart, the distant rattle of branches against the roof. I wondered what Max saw in the darkness that I couldn't. I wondered if he remembered a time before me, a time when he, too, was afraid of being alone at AS. The night deepened, so did my thoughts. I thought about the first time I brought Max home, how he paced the apartment for hours, anxious and unsure, until finally curling up beside me on the cold, tiled floor. I remembered how, over months, he'd learned my routines, waiting by the door every evening, whining softly when I left for work, greeting me with wild, joyful leaps when I returned. I remembered the way he'd pressed himself against me during thunderstorms, the way he'd comforted me through heartbreak, through job loss, through every quiet disappointment. Max was more than just a dog. He was the only witness to all the moments I'd never share with anyone else, but tonight, the comfort I usually found in him was tangled with something else, a sense of responsibility, a deep ache that came from knowing I was all he had, too. If I was scared, he would be scared. If I was lost, so was he. The clock ticked on. The world outside faded away, until it was just the two of us under the blanket, each of us pretending for the other's sake. I didn't realize I was crying until Max licked a tear from my cheek. I blinked, surprised, then buried my face in his fur. "Sorry, buddy," I whispered, my voice muffled. "I guess I'm not as tough as I thought." Max pressed against me, not moving, not making a sound. Just being there, steady and solid, in the one place I needed him most. Outside, a car passed in the street, its headlights cutting briefly across the window. I stiffened, watching the shapes dance on the wall. Max's ears perked, but he stayed where he was, his body a barrier between me and the unknown. Slowly, my panic faded, replaced by a kind of weary resignation. Maybe this was just how things were now, me and Max against the world, waiting for morning in a house that wasn't ours yet. I reached for my phone, checking the time. For 17 a.m. I wondered if anyone else was awake, if, in other houses, other beds, people were lying awake and staring at their ceilings, too scared or too sad to sleep. I wondered if this feeling, the fear, the hope, the raw, electric loneliness, was universal, or if it was just my own private storm. I lay back, Max's head heavy on my shoulder, and tried to picture the future. Maybe tomorrow, things would be different. Maybe the house would feel less haunted in daylight, the rooms less empty. Or maybe not. Maybe the only way out of this darkness was through it, one night at a time, one moment after another, holding tight to the warmth that was real. Max finally sighed, a long, shuddering breath, and I felt his muscles relax beneath my arm. I kissed the top of his head, letting my tears dry in his fur. "Thank you," I whispered, not sure if I was talking to him or to myself, though I closed my eyes, listening for morning. For the first time since I'd moved in, I didn't feel entirely lost. Because Max was here, and I was still breathing, and sometimes that's all you can ask for. I didn't know what would happen when the sun rose, whether I'd find the courage to face another day, whether the world outside these walls would be kind. But right now, in this bed, under this blanket, I wasn't alone, and that, I realized, was enough to keep going. The world outside faded to a gentle gray as the night wore on, a hush settling over the house like a heavy velvet curtain. For the first time since moving in, I let my guard down, even just a little, because Max was there, a living anchor at my side. The constant, steady presence of his breath, his fur against my skin, his quiet patience. It was as if my world had been narrowed to the space beneath that blanket, where nothing else could intrude, but even there, in the dim safety of early dawn, my thoughts were far from quiet. I listened to Max's heartbeat. It was calm and sure. In a way that mine had never been. His eyes closed and his breathing slowed, but every so often, his ear would twitch, or his paw would flex against my side as if he was still dreaming of running through sunlit fields. I envied him. The way he seemed to let go of every worry, to trust the moment for what it was, a simple, unremarkable piece of our lives, but I wasn't built that way. My mind ran in circles, old memories chasing me through the hours. I thought about the first night I brought Max home. He was small then, all legs and confusion, terrified of the echo in my empty apartment. He'd spent that night pacing and whimpering, paws tapping restlessly across my hardwood floor. It wasn't until I'd finally given up on sleep and sat down beside him on the rug that he'd curled up in my lap and sighed. I'd whispered promises into his fur, promises about forever, about never being alone again. Back then, I needed to believe them as much as he did. I stroked Max's head, my hand moving in slow circles. "You remember that night?" I whispered, my voice cracking. It was just us then, too. Max shifted, his eyelids fluttering. Maybe he heard me. Maybe he only felt the tremble in my touch. I stared into the darkness, letting memories pull me back, each one vivid and raw. There was the time I'd cried in the kitchen, loud, ugly sobs that filled the space after my job interview ended in polite silence and a half-hearted, "We'll let you know." I'd slumped to the floor, convinced I'd failed. Max had patted over, head cocked, and placed a single paw on my knee. He didn't whine, didn't lick my face, just sat there, waiting, until I looked up and remembered how to breathe again. There were rainy afternoons when the world felt impossibly small, when the gray pressed in and the only escape was the soft warmth of Max beside me on the couch. I traced the pattern of his spots and let my mind drift, safe in the knowledge that he'd never judge me for my silence or my sadness. I remembered cold winter mornings, too, sunlight sparkling on frost, Max bounding ahead of me on the sidewalk, leash taut, breath steaming in the air. Those days had felt endless, but in the best way. Back then, hope had always seemed just around the corner, waiting for us to find it. Now, hope felt like something I'd lost, misplaced in a box somewhere between old apartments, old routines, old dreams. I glanced at the clock. 4:47 a.m. Time crawled by, each minute a reminder that morning was coming, that this night would end whether I was ready or not. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, and Max's head snapped up, ears high and alert. His body tensed, a low growl rumbling in his chest, a sound I'd heard only a handful of times in our years together. I reached for him, pressing my hand to his collar. Hey. Shh. It's just the house. It's just us. He looked at me. Eyes wide and shining in the dimness, as if searching my face for confirmation. The growl faded, replaced by a whine so soft it was almost a sigh. I felt his fear in that moment, a mirror of my own. He was protecting me, and I was protecting him, both of us bluffing our way through the darkness. My heart twisted with guilt. Max had always been my shield, the one who stood between me and loneliness. But how often had I been his? How often had I comforted him, just for the sake of it, without needing anything in return? I bent down and buried my face in his ruff, inhaling the scent of dog and sleep and safety. He licked my cheek, and I laughed, surprised by the sound. It was small and shaky, but it was real. It's going to be okay, I told him, and maybe. This time, I almost believed it. The house was still. I let myself imagine that there really was nothing lurking outside the door, that the walls were just walls, not silent witnesses to my every fear. I held Max closer, drawing strength from the solidity of his body, the steady rhythm of his breath. For a while, I just talked to him. Not about anything important, just words, whispered into the blanket, secrets that only a dog could keep. I miss home, I admitted, not sure what I even meant by homey anymore. I miss having somewhere to belong. But I guess you're my home now, aren't you? Max blinked, his tail thumping once against my leg. I wish I could see the future, I murmured. I wish I knew how this all turns out. I wish I knew if I'll ever feel safe again. He didn't answer, of course. He just watched me, eyes heavy with sleep and understanding. I stroked his side, feeling the familiar rise and fall of his breath. It was enough. For now, it was enough. Minutes blurred together. Somewhere outside, a bird called, a lonely, early sound that signaled the night's retreat. The tension that had strung me tight for hours finally began to unravel, bit by bit. I felt my body relaxing into the mattress, the last shreds of adrenaline draining away. Max snuggled closer, his warmth a balm against the chill that clung to my bones. I closed my eyes, letting the gentle rhythm of his breathing lull me into something like peace. I didn't sleep, not really, but I drifted, hovering on the edge of dreams. In those half-formed visions, Max and I wandered sunlit fields, chased butterflies, curled up in front of fireplaces that crackled with welcome. I saw us whole again, unafraid, belonging, but beneath the surface, a thin thread of fear still tugged at me. I was afraid of letting go, afraid of what morning might bring, afraid that this fragile, makeshift comfort wouldn't survive the daylight. What if the world was just as cold and uncertain as it had been yesterday? What if nothing had changed at all? I opened my eyes. Max was watching me, head tilted, as if he understood every silent worry. I smiled. You're not going anywhere. Are you? He wagged his tail, and for a heartbeat, everything was simple. I thought about the first time I'd really cried in front of him, how embarrassed I'd been, how desperately I'd tried to hide my weakness. But Max had never cared. He'd just been there, patient and loyal and unmovable. I'd learned, over time, that love didn't require explanations. It didn't demand that I always be strong, or always have the right words. Sometimes, it was just a dog resting his head in your lap, reminding you that you didn't have to be alone. The sky outside began to lighten, pale blue bleeding through the darkness. I listened as the house slowly came to life, the creak of settling beams, the distant hum of a neighbor's car. The world was waking up, and for once, I didn't dread it. I rolled onto my back, stretching beneath the blanket. Max yawned and flopped beside me, his head resting on my chest. I laughed, feeling the vibration in my ribs, and scratched behind his ears. Come on, lazy. Let's see what today has in store. He perked up, tongue lolling, ready for whatever adventure I could offer. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something close to hope. Maybe the house would never be mine, not in the way my old apartment had been, but it was ours now. Ours to fill with new memories, new routines, new mornings. I looked at Max, and he looked back, as if promising that wherever I went, he'd follow. And maybe that was all I needed to know. That as dawn spilled across the floor, I let myself believe that the worst of the night was behind us. That together, we could make this place, this bed, this house, this uncertain future, a home. Sunrise didn't arrive all at once, but seeped slowly into the room, inch by inch, until every shadow on the wall was a memory of the night before. I lay still, watching the ceiling shift from slate to pearl, feeling Max's steady warmth at my side. A bird called outside, insistent, almost angry, its song echoing through the empty house, too loud for such a quiet morning. For a while, I pretended nothing had changed. I let myself drift, cocooned in the weight of blankets and dog and the last remnants of sleep, clinging to the fragile peace I'd found with Max in the dark. But peace, I knew, was always temporary. Even the safest places could be undone by daylight. Max woke first, his ears twitching. He lifted his head and gave a soft whine, the kind that always meant something's off. I propped myself up on one elbow, suddenly aware of every creak in the house, every groan of wood and wind. "What is it, buddy?" I asked, my voice still thick with sleep. He didn't answer, of course. He just stared at the door, tail flat against the bed, body tense. For a moment, I listened, too. At first, there was only silence, the comforting kind. But then, somewhere deep in the house, a soft, rhythmic thumping. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the fridge. It was something else. I swallowed. My first thought was pipes, or maybe a branch against the siding. But the sound was steady, measured, and much too deliberate. Max shifted beside me, eyes never leaving the door. I felt my own heart pick up pace, echoing the distant thumping. "It's probably nothing," I told him, though I couldn't quite convince myself. "Just the house settling." But Max didn't buy it. He jumped off the bed, nails clicking on the hardwood, and stood square in front of the door, hackles raised. For a moment I saw him not as my soft, sleepy companion, but as a protector, something fierce and certain in a world that wasn't. I forced myself up, pulling on yesterday's sweater and tiptoeing across the floor. The house was cold, the air sharp. I pressed my ear to the door, holding my breath. The sound had stopped. See? I whispered, more to myself than to Max. "Nothing there." He looked back at me, skeptical, then relaxed, just a little. I opened the door and peered down the hallway. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight, but nothing moved. Still, the sense of unease lingered, a cold spot at the base of my spine. Maybe this is what it means to start over, I thought. Always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Always on guard, even when there's nothing to see. I walked with Max through the empty house, checking each room. The kitchen was untouched, the living room quiet, the windows all latched. I double-checked the locks, twice, just in case. In the laundry room, a broom had fallen, propped awkwardly against the door. I stared at it for a long time, willing it to explain itself. Was that the noise? Was that all? Max seemed satisfied. He sniffed the broom, gave a little huff, and padded back toward the kitchen. I followed, a shaky laugh escaping my lips. See? Nothing to worry about. We're just jumpy, that's all. I tried to believe it. That we went through the morning rituals of food. Coffee, Max pacing at my heels as I poured cereal into a chipped bowl. I opened the back door and watched as he bounded into the yard, nose to the ground, tail finally wagging. For a moment, I let myself relax. The world felt almost normal, almost right, but the sense of unease never fully left. Every time I turned my back, I felt the house watching me, waiting for me to slip up. Every noise, the rattle of the fridge, the distant hum of traffic, the creak of a floorboard, made me jump. I stood by the window, staring out at the garden overgrown with weeds and wildflowers, wondering if I would ever belong here. Was I haunting this house, or was it haunting me? Max barked, a single, sharp sound that jerked me out of my thoughts. I rushed to the door, heart hammering, to see him barking at the fence, fur bristling. A stray cat darted along the top rail, disappearing into the hedge. I sagged with relief. "It's just a cat, Max," I said, though my voice was shaky, but he kept barking, low and insistent. It took several minutes and a handful of treats to lure him back inside. For the rest of the morning, Max stuck close. Wherever I went, making the bed, folding laundry, scrolling half-heartedly through job listings, he was there, silent and alert. Every so often he'd pause, ears cocked, nose twitching, as if he sensed something just out of sight. His unease fed mine, and soon I found myself triple-checking the doors and windows, searching corners for things I knew weren't there. By noon, I was exhausted, tired of being afraid, tired of fighting shadows. I sat on the floor in the hallway. Max curled up at my feet, and let my thoughts unravel. I thought about the life I'd left behind. The way I'd built safety out of routines, same coffee shop, same bus stop, same familiar faces in the elevator. I'd always told myself I could start over anywhere, as long as I had a plan. But nothing about this new life was part of any plan. I was lost, unmoored, flailing in a place that refused to let me feel at home. Max rested his head on my knee, sighing. I ran my fingers through his fur, letting the rhythm calm my nerves. "You're braver than me," I whispered. "At least you know what you want." "Me? I don't even know what I'm looking for anymore." He looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something wise and ancient in his gaze, something that said, "Just be here. Just stay with me." The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to focus on small things, unpacking a box of books, wiping down the counters, washing dishes. I played fetch with Max in the yard, his joy a bright spot in the endless gray. But every moment alone felt heavier, the silence pressing in on me. Evening came faster than I expected. I made dinner, a sad sandwich and some soup from a can, and ate on the couch. Max sprawled across my feet. I left the lights on, every single one, trying to chase the darkness from the corners. But it crept back in, stubborn and patient. When bedtime came, I hesitated at the doorway. The bed was made, the blankets still rumpled from the night before. I stared at the space where Max had curled up beside me, remembering the peace we'd found in the darkness. Max jumped onto the bed without waiting for permission. He circled once, twice, then flopped down with a huff, as if he owned the place. I laughed, some of the tension dissolving. "You're not subtle, are you?" I teased, scratching behind his ears. That he thumped his tail, then rolled onto his back, paws in the air. For the first time all day, I smiled, a real, honest smile that reached all the way to my eyes. I climbed in beside him, pulling the blanket up to my chin. For a long moment, I just lay there, listening to his breathing, feeling the weight of his body pressed against mine. But as the house settled, the sense of unease returned. I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, waiting for another sound, another sign that I didn't belong here. A floorboard creaked. Max's ears twitched, and he sat up, muscles tense. I held my breath, listening. This time, there was nothing, just the wind outside, the distant hum of a car on the road. But the fear didn't fade. It lingered, sharp and cold. I reached for Max, pulling him close. "It's just us," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "It's just us." He pressed his head against my shoulder, and slowly, my heartbeat steadied. As the darkness deepened, I let myself believe, just for a little while, that we were safe. That we belonged. That together, we could face whatever came next. But in the quiet, with Max's warmth beside me and the world waiting just outside the window, I knew the truth. Some nights, you have to fight for peace. Some nights, even the bravest heart can't keep every shadow at bay. But maybe, just maybe, if you hold on tight, you'll make it through until morning. The darkness pressed in heavier than before, as if the house itself was reluctant to let go of the night. I lay awake, cocooned beneath the blanket, Max curled against my side. My thoughts drifted in uneasy circles, back to the job I'd lost, the friends I couldn't call, the home I'd left behind. But this night was different. I felt the edge of something, change, maybe, or the faint heartbeat of a new beginning. To Max's breathing was slow and deep, a comfort I clung to. His fur was warm beneath my fingers, and his presence pushed back at the loneliness that still threatened to swallow me. Every so often, his body tensed, as if even in sleep he was listening for danger. It was just after midnight when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hallway. My breath caught. I froze, listening as the footsteps creaked closer. Slow and deliberate. Max jerked awake, his ears pricked and eyes wide. A low growl vibrated in his chest, a warning and a plea all at once. My heart thudded in my chest. I squeezed Max's collar, pulling him closer. "It's okay," I whispered, but my voice shook. Every hair on my arm stood on end. The old terror returned. What if I wasn't alone? What if all the comfort of the night had been an illusion? The footsteps paused outside my door. I held my breath. Max's growl deepened, vibrating through my whole body. Shadows flickered across the ceiling. I stared, waiting, each second stretching into forever. The doorknob rattled. Max leapt off the bed, planting himself between me and the door, body rigid, head lowered. I felt a surge of gratitude and fear in equal measure. Was someone really there? Or was this another trick of the house, a haunted echo of all the stress and sleeplessness bottled up inside me? I sat up, my hands trembling. "Who's there?" My voice barely rose above a whisper of silence. Then, a single sharp knock. I scrambled for my phone, fingers fumbling in the dark, but the battery was dead and a small, final betrayal. Max barked, sharp and fierce. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. Another knock. Then footsteps, moving away. I strained to listen, nothing but my own panicked breath and Max's growls filling the space. After what felt like forever, I found the courage to tiptoe to the door, Max glued to my side. I pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing. I waited, forcing my breathing to slow. I could hear Max's tail thumping softly, as if he was torn between defending me and comforting me. Finally, I opened the door just a crack. The hallway was empty. A thin line of moonlight cut across the floor, illuminating the broom that had fallen again, this time right outside my door. My relief was so sharp it almost hurt. "Just the broom, Max," I said, trying to laugh, but the sound came out strange. Still, the fear that had gripped me began to loosen its hold. Max sniffed the broom, then looked up at me as if to say, "See? I told you I'd keep you safe." We crept back into the bedroom, closing the door gently behind us. I collapsed on the bed, shaking with adrenaline. Max jumped up beside me, circling once before flopping down against my chest. I buried my face in his fur, letting the tears come, hot and silent and necessary. "Thank you," I whispered, stroking his ears. "Thank you for not leaving me alone." I stayed like that for a long time, letting the fear ebb away. Outside, the world was still. The house felt less menacing, more like an old friend trying, awkwardly, clumsily, to make me feel at home. When I finally drifted into sleep, I dreamed of my old life. I was back in my city apartment, sunlight streaming through the windows, laughter ringing down the hallways. Max was there, too, younger, tail wagging as he darted from room to room. In the dream, I opened every door, every window, unafraid, but then something shifted. The dream darkness returned, crawling in around the edges. The rooms blurred, voices faded, and the old loneliness pressed in again. I reached for Max, calling his name, but the hallway stretched on forever. I woke with a gasp, heart pounding. Max licked my face, a solid, living presence that shattered the last remnants of the nightmare. The first pale light of dawn bled into the room, touching everything with silver. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the gentle hush of the morning. I realized how different I felt. Exhausted, yes, but lighter somehow, as if the worst of the night had finally passed. I sat up and hugged Max, pulling him close. "We made it," I said softly. "We made it through." Max nuzzled my shoulder, then hopped off the bed, ready to start the day. I followed, blinking sleep from my eyes, surprised by the faintest flicker of hope. Downstairs, I brewed coffee while Max paced the kitchen, tail wagging, ready for breakfast. The day felt new, uncertain, but brimming with possibility. The house no longer felt like a trap. It was just a place, walls, windows, rooms waiting to be filled with new memories. I poured Max's food, laughing as he spun in impatient circles. "You hungry, boy?" He barked, bright and happy, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel silly talking to him like he understood every word. After breakfast, we ventured into the backyard. Dew sparkled on the grass. Max darted ahead, nose to the ground, chasing a trail only he could see. I watched him run, free and fearless, and something inside me loosened, a knot I'd carried for far too long. That we spent the morning exploring, me tidying the overgrown garden, Max digging at mysterious scents by the fence. Every so often, he'd race back to me, pressing his head against my knee, as if to say, "See? I'm still here. You're still here. We're okay." At by noon, I was tired but satisfied. The sun warmed my face. I felt a sense of accomplishment, small but real. Back inside, I sat at the kitchen table, flipping through job listings on my phone. Max sprawled beneath my feet, snoring softly. I found myself smiling for no reason. Even the smallest steps forward felt worth celebrating, but just as I was settling into this fragile calm, my phone buzzed, a new email, subject line, interview invitation. My heart leapt into my throat. I stared at the screen, unsure if I was ready. Could I really face the world again? I looked down at Max. He watched me, eyes steady, tail thumping against the floor. His faith in me was unshakable. And suddenly, I realized that maybe I could borrow a little of his courage, just enough to try. That night, as I got ready for bed, I left the door open. Max didn't wait for an invitation, he jumped onto the covers, tail wagging, ready to claim his spot beside me. I laughed, grateful for his loyalty, for his belief in us, for his steadfast heart. As I turned off the light, the room felt different. The shadows no longer pressed so close. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt like a place where something good could grow, where hope could return. I slid beneath the blanket, Max's weight of comfort at my feet. The old fear stirred, but it was quieter now, held at bay by the warmth of his presence. I let my mind wander, to the future, to the interview, to the promise of days still unwritten. I knew there would be more hard nights, more uncertainty, more moments when I doubted everything. But I also knew I'd never be truly alone, not with Max at my side. Just as I was drifting into sleep, the blanket shifted. Max crawled up, pressing his face close to mine, his eyes luminous in the dark. "I see you," I whispered, smiling into the darkness. "I see you, Max. And I think I finally see myself again, too." He gave a soft, contented sigh, curling into the space beside me. Outside, the first stars blinked into view. Inside, the world was quiet, safe, filled with the promise that, whatever came next, we would face it together. And as I closed my eyes, I understood at last, sometimes, all it takes to survive the darkness is a friend who refuses to let go. Sometimes, the face you find beneath the blanket is the one that saves you, again and again, until you remember how to save yourself. I drifted into sleep, Max beside me, my fears finally quieted by the steady beat of his heart. And in that gentle darkness, I knew the truth, I was never truly alone.